Welcome to the July 22 CIECAST, New Technologies in Paint and Coatings. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenters are Dan Benton, Global Product Director of Color Marketing with Axalta Coating Systems, Jeff Wildman, Manager of OEM and Industry Relations for BASF North America, and Andy Hysi, eBusiness Manager with AkzoNobel. And today we're here to talk about paint. And surprisingly to me, there's a lot that's going on in the paint world with technology. And so I'd like to start out with some questions, and I'll start with you, Dan, if you don't mind. What do you see as the most impactful change coming out of the coatings industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think everybody out there is very familiar with ADAS and all the components that are going into vehicles that impact radar permittivity and the ability to see what else is around you. Not just full-fledged autonomous driving, but short-term things like lane departure warnings, those types of things. So the needs for being able to use radar and LIDAR technology in vehicles is is impacting coatings today. I'm sure Jeff and Andy can tell you the same thing. So as we formulate new colors, this becomes a concern, something we have to really pay attention to. Colors that are formulated with high metallic content, metallic flake, that type of thing, can be a problem for radar and LiDAR. So that's one of the areas that I think in the next 3 years will be impacting actual colors. There's some other areas regarding functional use. So anti-fouling for marine type finishes, keep those barnacles off the boats, that type of thing. Also, we look at the surge in electric vehicles that are coming along. The coatings that will facilitate more efficiencies, right, in electric vehicles, and heat dissipation and conductivity and those types of things are all going to be coming into play here in the next 3 to 5 years. Great,
thank you. Next question, Jeff Wildman.
Sorry, Jeff.
Does the increasing role of ADAS, radar, LiDAR, and other technologies affect the way in which coatings are manufactured and applied both in the factory and in the collision repair process?
Well, yes, and kind of like Dan said, there's a lot going on right now with coatings and the development of those to understand what impacts those sensors, the radar sensors and the LiDAR sensors, and which types of colors you can and cannot see with different types of sensors. So you see a lot of differences, and when we talk about the collision side of the business especially, when we talk about how do you apply these coatings properly, it's becoming much more important to follow the procedures. I mean, just like we talk about following OEM repair procedures, when you're welding or replacing parts on a car, you need to do the same thing now with paint, because it really is a functional part of those safety systems. And in some cases, especially with some of the translucent colors, we may be looking to reflect off of the primer behind the color rather than the color of the vehicle. So if you're not applying the right color primers or applying too much base coat, that may not operate properly. In addition to what Dan was saying about the amount of metallics in it. And that goes back to how many coats of base coat do you put on. And I've worked with a lot of painters that one extra coat just to make sure I've got coverage. Well, that one extra coat may cause that radar sensor not to work. So you really need to follow those procedures.
And Jeff, how do the shops find those procedures?
Each paint company, I mean, really, when you talk to the OEMs about paint, they really refer you back to your paint manufacturer. And those are the things we have in our technical manuals, as well as all of our technical training that we do. And you'll see that from all the paint manufacturers out there. We all have that information specific to our paint brands.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Andy. So AI is a big topic in many parts of the automotive and collision industries. Do you see AI and big data playing a role in the coatings industry?
Sure, absolutely. With the digital transformation going on in the industry, obviously AI and big data are everywhere. More and more data are being generated that offer a great deal of potential. Similar to other industries, coatings manufacturers are working diligently to ensure a sustainable coatings future together with customers and other stakeholders. In terms of big data, the industry can use information obtained from various, for example, vehicle smart sensors. This can help with defect detection, preventative maintenance. Of course, it will be possible to connecting the dots of an accident, such as events will be a lot more precise, obviously, in the future when accomplished through big data reconstruction. In terms of AI usage, specifically in coatings, application scenarios range across the life cycle. We have the simple smart recommendations. We have generated design, anomaly detection, preventative maintenance. So these are all things that pave the way for products, how products are designed and produced. In coatings development, machine learning can be used to predict resin or formulation performance. So that's also been used quite heavily. At the same time, applying AI in collision repair training can be very helpful. Of course, it's been proven that AI-powered learning courses and content that we see online will significantly improve completion rates and boost engagement overall. In summary, we'll say that AI is a field that is constantly growing and evolving in the coatings industry. It's important to adopt a mindset of using AI in current workflows for years to come, knowing that changes will have to be done along the way, for sure.
Great, thanks. All right, now back to you, Dan. What is driving the innovation in the coatings industry?
So I think, again, environmental concerns is one piece of it. There's no doubt about it. VOC legislation, and that's been around for a while, but that continues. Using lower energy coatings, spartate chemistries, right? So that coatings can be applied at lower energy levels, and cured at lower energy levels, that type of thing. I also think, to be quite honest with you, aesthetics are driving it to some degree. We've seen some really remarkable things recently from manufacturers like Mazda in particular. We'll pick on them. They've introduced some innovative colors recently. Consumers like, so they can actually move market share a little bit with by using color, which is from my perspective a great thing. But they're developing new application innovations that allow very thin layers, and it's creating some new color capability. There's also some things going on around high chroma and dispersion technologies. So I think just the need to reach further into color space and to drive market share is also driving some of these innovations, which is kind of exciting, right? Often innovations are related to, like I said, environmental and cost issues, but it's great when we innovate to do something new and really impact the market.
So Dan, I'll go off script here for a minute. So I'm curious. Yeah. When the OEs are coming out with the next year's colors, what's the process? How does that work? Obviously, the paint manufacturers work with the OEs. How does that color selection process work?
It's a great question, Paul. It's an interesting one. I get it often too. I'll be honest with you. So it's kind of an iterative process. We as the three of us work for coatings companies, and I know BASF has a lot of OEM light vehicle business like we do, and Axo does too, but not in necessarily the light vehicle space. But in the light vehicle space, what happens is we work with designers, and so there are pigment manufacturers that we work with. We style new colors, and typically what we'll do is develop a palette of new colors styled, for models that maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. And we work very closely with the fashion industry. We watch very carefully what's going on in fashion around the world. Geopolitics impact it, the economy, you name it, all has an impact on where color's going. But we develop a palette, like I said, about 4 to 5 years out, and we sit down with designers at automotive companies, and we work through them with them, and then they'll look at it, and they know what they're doing in vehicle design and what's coming for their particular company. and they'll become interested in a certain color area. They might, from that group of 50 or 80 colors, start to cull some of them out of there and say, we like this, we like where this is going. We'd like to see this adjusted either for hue or chroma or, value. And so again, it starts back and forth where we, move the color around a little bit for them, back and forth. And then finally they settle in on a color or colors. And again, oftentimes if there's a brand new model they're going to be debuting, say 2-3 years from now, color becomes really, really important for a successful launch. And again, I mentioned Mazda earlier. We're seeing others do the same thing. As they get ready for a new model launch, they really are focusing on color to make a big splash.
Great, thanks.
Paul, just to chime in on that a little bit, I was lucky enough this morning, we actually started one of our color trend shows, the preview of it. And it's just like Dan said, the designers were there, and listening to them talk about color versus listening to a collision center talk about color. It's really night and day.
It really is.
But they were really looking at the palette and where it fit and design. And like you said, Dan, okay, we like this area. What if we took it this way or that way? The other thing that was really interesting about it was, as we looked at all these colors, they had little icons on them. Were these radar compliant? So what's the permittivity levels on them? We looked at sustainability. So what's the environmental impact and so forth over the life of that color and how it's coming out? And those are all things that the OEMs were interested in. And like I said, it was really interesting to start to hear them talk about it in contrast to what we think about in collision when we're talking about how do you match this color, or how did they come up with this color? Why did they make it so complex? And the designers don't think about any of that.
Oh, you're right. And I think the designers and the production guys at the OEMs sometimes, have competing interests, right? The production guys want to get vehicles through, and they want, the vehicle to look good, in terms of fit and finish. And, the designers are saying, no, we got to do something innovative here. And so there's always that battle. But it's interesting. And I love what you said. You're right. It's so different, the conversation on the OEM side versus the refinish side. Very, very different.
So supply chain issues have been a problem across other aspects of the industry. Is the paint industry or the coatings industry affected by that as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'll start that one. I'm sure you guys have some comments too. Yeah, it's been a very difficult time for our industry as well in terms of supply of everything. Resins, like monomers make resins and pigments, and it's been challenging. I think we all didn't think this was going to last this long, but we're still not through the woods yet on a lot of this.
Yeah, and it's things that you don't think about, because like you said, we're susceptible to the same thing as the rest of society, all other businesses. And one of the things that we ran into at one point was we heard, well, there's a shortage of steel. We can't get paint cans. So we've got plenty of paint, can't put it in a can. Or it's there. How do you get it shipped where you need it? And we're all fighting the same battle there, regardless of the industry you're in or the company you're with. Everybody's seeing it. It's all about how do you manage it.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Next question, Jeff. What role does technology play in color match? Do you see these trends continuing? Are there other technologies emerging in the future?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the technology in the vehicle really impacts, the colors and how we match those colors. And I think Dan mentioned permittivity and the impact of metallics in some of those colors with the way radar works. So how do you formulate a metallic color without using metallics or using different types of metallics? What do you do when you start how many times can that vehicle be repainted? Or how many coats of paint? And we all see from a lot of the OEMs position statements that say no more than 2 coats of paint, or no more than so many mils of paint could go on a bumper. All of those things are impacting that repair process and the technology, but you also see it in color match. And you see the digitalization of color matching going on. And how does technology tie into that? And it goes back to what Andy was talking about with AI and big data. When you use a spectro to match a color versus a color chip, You know, there was a day when I'll take the color chip over a Spectro any day. Well, today, look at today's Spectros, and they get smarter and smarter as they collect more data. And we see more and more of that big data. You see, again, when you start talking about the OEMs, and they're doing digital color match, they're doing digital color design. So we're designing colors with the OEMs on a much faster, trying to do those digitally before anything is ever sprayed out. And like I said, I think you see the same thing in the shops. And it's been interesting working with shops here in the last year, especially, where you'd walk into the shop and don't take my color chips. And now you walk into the same shop, it's like, I don't need the color chips. Give me the Spectro.
Right.
Okay. Great, thank you. Andy, next question. With respect to technology in the coating industries, what can we expect in how the technology will integrate with shop management systems?
Yes, indeed. So technology is very prevalent in the coatings industry. Like my colleagues mentioned, we see it everywhere with AI, big data, and all of our tools and equipment. The last few years have sparked a lot of innovation from all industry stakeholders, driven mainly by these digitization efforts, as well as customers' needs. The BMS, Body Shop Management Systems, and related software solutions, they are at the center of all this. And as essential tools, they enable a great deal of support, obviously, for thousands of shops. For some background, most software applications are designed to solve a particular need, a business need or a problem, and then you build on top of it. In many cases, these applications are designed somewhat in vacuum, so every software is unique, and a lot of software solutions don't kind of play nicely with each other. So the software integration, which is mainly this process of joining two or more packages, it solves this problem, so now they work in tandem. The integration amongst all these packages has become a much higher need. Of course, that's why we strongly support CIECAST's role in building and updating this communication standards implementation guides. So how does this integrate, obviously? Consumers are the main drivers for more tech. They demand immediate service. We're so used to what we experience in our daily lives to expect the same thing, from work as well. So for businesses to meet that demand, it's essential that various programs have the capability to exchange data. This benefits, obviously, puts the business and customers in the driver's seat, and it enables so many self-service tasks from their comfort of their home. So we saw this during the past few years, where customers, obviously, now you see a lot more customers can set up their own appointments, they can check themselves in, they can upsell themselves on needed services, they can pay with a tap of the finger. So all these things are possible because of the integration. In addition, I would say with the software integration, it makes it possible to offer a much more personalized experience for customers, better communication, updated messages, different payment options, and so on. So software integrations, in summary, will continue to grow with shop management systems and other productivity-related tools. They are basically the key to better communication, greater efficiency, cost savings, and a seamless customer experience.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question, Dan. Where are the OEMs going with respect to paint?
Well, again, radar, LIDAR, we've talked about that. Jeff mentioned it again. As their BASF starting their styling, we're doing the same thing. The trend shows, and in the aftermarket side, where we spend most of our time, we're anxious for that to get started, because you can imagine if they style color the right way, that's appropriate for LIDAR and radar, it'll make it easier on us in refinish, right? So, we could see less and less metallic effect pigments, more pearl, that type of thing, to get that effect pigment, or just different types, right? So I think you'll see some innovations and changes from OEMs in terms of the effect pigments they use. So, traditional metal flake might turn into something else that still gives the sparkle and the hue shifting that makes certain colors so attractive. I think the other thing, again, I mentioned energy earlier. That's also always important on the OE side, to reduce energy. There's environmental legislation there as well. It's driving them. But I mentioned earlier too, one of the things that we're seeing that is challenging for refinish is this idea of layering and very, very thin layers, which again makes repair a little more challenging. not just in matching colors, but in applying them, for a body shop. When an OEM is painting an assembly line with high-tech bells, electrostatic paint, and then you got a guy in a body shop trying to fix it with a handgun, gravity feed, application becomes a big thing. It impacts color match capability and appearance. So see a lot of that. We are seeing some other things in styling too, around two-tones, which is different. And if you think back, many decades ago, two-tone, especially in the 20s and 30s, was a common thing. We're seeing some of that come back a little bit. So there's all kinds of interesting things. That's the thing about color that's so interesting, right? It's always moving. It's always changing. As I said, it's linked to fashion in so many ways. So it never gets dull or stale. It's always doing something different.
Okay. And next question then, Jeff, and Dan, I think, touched on it a little bit, but when the rubber meets the road and the car does go into the shop, what are the impacts to the repairer dealing with all this technology?
There's a lot of impacts, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of collision centers need to kind of wrap their heads around somewhat. Is paint's really a functional part of that vehicle now. It used to be primarily cosmetics. It gave the color, and yes, it provided some corrosion protection, but it was there to provide that color and get that emotion from the customers they bought the car to begin with. Now we're talking about vehicles that, again, with the radar and the LIDAR, to make those systems work right, the coatings have to be the right type of coatings, applied the right way, applied in the right thickness. Dan mentioned some of these really ultra thin layers that are being applied at the OEM level now. And I know I've seen some of those, and trying to duplicate that by hand is almost impossible. So how do you match those colors? We start to we're seeing a lot of matte finishes, and we've all dealt with that in the shop, but we know how that works. You mentioned Mazda, I think, and some of the colors they've come out with, and we've seen those for a few years, but some of those can be very difficult. And a lot of the OEMs today are trying to come up with that color that really differentiates them. And people see it and they say, wow, I've got to have that. Well, what's involved in fixing that? And in some cases, we're seeing new pigments come out, and those pigments aren't available in your traditional mixing system. And every refinish company's got them. And we may use that pigment in one color, so it doesn't make sense for you to have that on your mixing machine. So it's really important that when you start looking at a vehicle today, that as soon as you look at the vehicle, when your estimator or your repair planner is looking at the vehicle, they're checking that color code. Because if it's got a limited edition toner, it may take you a week or more to get that into your shop. Right. You don't want to wait until that car's in the booth and say, oh, wow, we don't have this toner, and find out it's going to take a week to get it. The other side of it is those toners are not necessarily cheap. So we hear this all the time. I don't get paid for that. Or how do I get paid for that? Well, now you're at the end of the line. You got to tell the customer it's going to take another week to paint the car, and I'm going to spend more money on paint now. If you catch that up front, you can build that into the program. You can set the expectation with your customer. And I think customer experience is something that we've got to really focus on more. And people don't think about the color and the paint. It's like, I'll worry about that when it gets to the booth. And that's what we've got to stop doing. And the painters have to look at those repair procedures. I know some OEMs out there have specific procedures. If the car is this model and it's this color, the bumper has to be replaced. If it's the same model in a different color, it can be repaired. Well, which ones are which? And if you don't know that up front, it really impacts that whole process. And I think those are some of the bigger things that we really need to look at. And like I mentioned earlier, following the right procedures. If I tell you to use a XYZ color primer, use that. And then put on 2 coats of base coat and then your tri-stage or whatever the case might be. But it's really important to do that so all these other tools and technology in the vehicle work properly.
Do you anticipate that the shops are going to have to invest in new equipment? Is that something that's coming down the road, or is the equipment that they have still going to work with all the new technologies?
As of today, the equipment they have works. But again, when we start getting into sustainability and we start talking about the environmental impacts, I mean, we've got UV coatings out there today. You're going to see more UV coatings because they have less of an environmental impact. They're more sustainable. So again, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, we've got UV primers and I need a small UV light. Well, if we have a UV clear, there are no UV lights today that can cover a whole car. So do you buy the light first or the clear first? And when do those come out? We will, you know, we've all moved to waterborne base coats. There are waterborne primers. And in other markets, in other industries, there are waterborne clears. We'll see those in our industry at some point. I don't know when exactly, but they're coming. When those come out, then I can tell you what equipment you might need for them.
Right.
But those are all the things that are coming up and that we're working on and looking at. And, you know, Dan mentioned, you know, the heat transmission. One of the biggest issues with an electric vehicle is range anxiety. When you run the air conditioner, you use that battery. And if you're driving a black car in Nevada, that air conditioner is running. So if we can make that black car reflect some of that heat, less power for the battery, you know, does that take something different to apply? I don't know yet. They're all in development, but again, they haven't come out to the refinish industry yet. So some of that's still up in the air. But at this point, everything we have, everything that's available, the tools and equipment you use today will work with.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question, Andy. Is there a need or are there opportunities to improve the way the industry communicates as it relates to the coatings in the industry?
Sure, absolutely. The technology is constantly evolving. As such, there will always be opportunities along the way driven mainly by customers' needs. Also, like to what Jeff mentioned earlier, that for special colors, things of that nature, it's always best to have these integrations in place. Imagine if you could just flag those colors, obviously, on the color management software as soon as something comes up, so those rarely used colors. So those are things that will always be possible with more integration between the various software companies out there. So it's anticipated, obviously, that efficiency, productivity, and safety across the paints and coatings supply chain will be improved along with digitization efforts. And these are all driving operational excellence out there. In the collision repair industry, there is already a high usage of technology for organizations of all sizes in the forms of smartphones, laptops, tablets, smart scales, etc. Right? These devices and platforms built on top of them, they're very important to the business. They assist all employees in doing several things, such as communicating with customers, completing research in support of daily operations, looking at OEM procedures, and so on. You need a computer, internet for pretty much everything, managing payroll, estimates, and so on. So more integration, more communication will be possible. Central to many businesses is the focus on the customer and customer satisfaction. Think voice of the customer as well. And due to increased usage of technology, collision repair centers and other stakeholders will be able to better understand the customer's needs and get better products to market more quickly. So this will help with anything from design all the way to support, all the way to refinish procedures and so on. So all these digital customer interfaces and various solution-based services will not only complement paints and coatings products, but we think they're going to be just as important as being competitive in the marketplace. So these are a must, and we'll continue to see growth in the communication space.
Great, thank you, Andy. Well, that concludes the formal questions that I've put together. Stacy Phillips, CIECA's marketing director, has been monitoring the webinar for questions. Stacy, do we have any questions for the panel?
Yes, thanks. The new Mercedes S-Class has specific paint codes approved for repainting. Do you think this granularity around repairability of paint codes will be a trend that will spread across OEMs?
That's a good question. You know, again, as we get back to the discussion of ADAS, some manufacturers like BMW have come out with very, very specific information by model on how to repair, right? And if they're going to be very specific with certain paint colors and paint codes that are on specific models, that's possible. We could see more of that. You know, typically, I think you see the higher end guys like Mercedes tend to be the first ones there to do things like this. But I'd say, yeah, it's a very real possibility that we can see more of that.
Thank you, Jeff, for
I would have to agree with Dan on that. And I think the OEMs are kind of learning this right now too. There's a lot of them really diving into this aspect of it and trying to come up with what is that proper strategy.
Mm-hmm. And there's also one more comment on that. You know, I think you guys see it too. There's the desire for custom is growing, right? Where, you know, customers want to customize as much as they can, and that's same for the paint and the color. So, you know, Lamborghini and, you know, others have long lists. You know, customers can put whatever color they want on the vehicle, right? They're paying what they're paying for it. But you're seeing some of the manufacturers who are creating production, you know, for the larger populations, also wanting to do the same things. So again, we could see more and more of niche stuff inside certain manufacturers. You know. So,
Thank you.
cost and complexity.
As a follow-up question, do you think repainting and repairability requirements will tighten up significantly for repairers with increasing levels of automation, let's say level 3 and up, where the OEMs are taking more of the liability?
Mm. One of you guys want to take a shot?
I mean, that's a great question.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that it's hard to answer, but I would venture to say yes. I mean, again, when we start looking at the amount of paint and the color and all the impacts on these ADAS technologies, as you start to move into more advanced technology and self-driving vehicles, it becomes more and more important to exactly how that vehicle is repaired and calibrated and that everything's working together properly. So I could definitely foresee that happening.
Yeah, I can too. I was just reading yesterday, Collision Weekly, you know, there's idea of ADAS certification for shops now, right? And you know, Paul, you asked the question earlier, what kind of equipment? And Jeff's right, they have the equipment they need right now, but the future, you know, we as paint manufacturers are looking at things like, how do we formulate a color coating that is, you know, compliant for radar? We work very hard on it. But then, you know, in the aftermarket, when you're repairing, you know, the repairer has to execute, as Jeff said, right on. If there are too many mills, they could take a formula that was compliant and it's no longer compliant, or if they tint and adjust the formula too much. So equipment and, you know, those types of things, you know, might change to meet that need, if you will. We'll see.
Thank you. Our next question refers to an EPA federal rule called 6H that regulates cadmium, chromium, lead, manganese, and nickel. Most paint manufacturers have reformulated them out. Do you think we'll continue to be able to avoid them in the future, so we're not subject to the 6H rule?
I don't see us adding those back. I don't see the government allowing to add those back. And if anything, you'll probably see more items added to that list as time goes on. As we talk about sustainability and the environment, you'll probably see that list grow. And that will cause certain colors to potentially go away.
I would agree 100%. You will see that list grow. To this day, you know, we struggle in the color world, you know, sometimes, like for example, nickel, right? It's something you can't use, but it's still sometimes used in automotive, and it can create problems, but we're not going to add them back. They're just going to, more and more going to go away. And then you're going to see there are differences sometimes between Europe and North America. If it isn't okay, I think you'll see that start to come together too. So as Jeff said, the bottom line is there are going to be more things restricted, not less. We're not going to go backwards.
Great, thank you. This next question, Jeff, you alluded to the thickness and permissivity of coatings now being a safety function. Does your company or any of the the other guest company. Can you share where that's listed or included in any of the procedures or paint information?
That information varies by OEM because each one uses potentially different types of sensors, or they're set up different ways with different softwares. The thickness of their bumpers are different. So each OEM it has a slightly different requirement for that. So we work with each one of those to understand what their requirements are, and then we work with the OEM testing our materials to test what they call permittivity, which is how the radar transmission moves through that bumper with coatings on it. And again, every OEM has a different requirement of what that test includes, whether it's put the paint on as recommended, put it on at twice the thickness recommended, or everything in between. So we're working with the OEMs right now because, again, they're learning a lot of this right along with us.
Right.
And none of them have a standard today that says, okay, this is radar compliant or this is not, or how do you flag it that way? It all goes back to those procedures. This is the way we want it applied, or you can only apply these colors over these bumpers, or no more than X number of mils on a bumper. So I think you'll see more and more changes there and more information coming out about it. And in the next 12 to 18 months, probably, but a lot of it's all new to everybody. And we're also seeing OEMs change from the frequency on the sensors that they're using, on the radar that they're using, and the different frequency, which is the permittivity. So we're seeing a lot of things that from the OEM that's changing that impacts this. So again, it really comes back to following those OEM repair procedures and making sure that you're following our application procedures to apply the product properly and use the right primers and sealers underneath.
Thank you,
That's pretty
Jeff.
complex. Just one thing I wanted to add was, I think, and Jeff touched on it, is, we really need an industry standard, right? So our industry groups, hopefully will be stepping up and helping develop an industry standard along with the OEMs in the coatings industry. We all need a standard. I mean, this is really about safety more than anything else, right? Functional coatings, but at the end of the day, safety. So we all have an interest in an industry standard here.
Yes.
Thank you. And that was along the lines of the next question about how to make the information available to all stakeholders to ensure all parties are aware of the unique color needs for a specific vehicle.
Yeah, I think that's, it's going to start with the OEMs because, as Jeff said, they're all different right now. And then we as paint suppliers are all working on it right now. But it'll be in technical data sheets and other things that we publish, that helps guide painters on, hey, here's how to properly apply. We do that today, right? Outside of ADAS, the primers and everything else to make sure that coatings work and work well. They get the right color match. But yeah, we'll start to all include them in our technical data sheets as we go forward.
That sounds
And
great.
that's one of the areas where I think Andy and big data is going to really get involved.
Yeah, that's true, Andy.
Absolutely.
Not to leave you out there,
Absolutely.
Andy.
Yeah. For sure. For the moment is use due diligence and follow the OEM repair procedures, but definitely there's a lot that can be done as an industry to publish these centrally somewhere. But you're right, we have technical data sheets. We have all of them online 24/7, but it makes sense to have something more centrally located as well.
Great. So do any of you have thoughts on BMW's color changing painting e-ink that was showcased at the CES show?
So yeah, we get these questions all the time, right? Because they become popular in the press and they get passed around. And I have friends and family that right away will send me an email or text going, "What's this? Can I get this?" So I hope the other guys will comment too. I think these are novelty coatings in a sense that they're not really viable for mass production or anything you'd see commonly, right? So just because the technology that it takes to actually do this, right? So they're using electrostatic, they're using, all kinds of things to make it change the color, right? So you're putting electricity basically into a pigment and causing it to change in the example they asked about. But there are other things that you hear about. Porsche just put something out recently about the blackest black, right? And you get a lot of questions on that. Again, typically these coatings are they're not practical for mass production and extremely expensive, and in some cases just not durable, right? Long-term stability is an issue there, right? You can't, those coatings won't last a long time. I'll put it that way. I don't know, Jeff, Andy, if you have anything else to add to that.
I mean, I look at it as it's a concept vehicle, and it's just like any other concept vehicle you see. How often do those concept vehicles actually come to market? Pieces of them do, and parts of them do, and some of that technology. And I think when you look at this, it's like, yeah, that's something we'd really love to have, but like Dan said, it's not feasible today. Down the road, might something like that work? Potentially, but again, we're looking down the road, and it won't be exactly what you saw. It'll be something in the ballpark, and that might give you some of that capability, but it's a concept to get people thinking.
Exactly, but that's where innovation starts, right? With an idea like that and a concept, and then it turns into something that is more practical, right? That gives you something new and different. Tri-coats are a good example. I'm unfortunately old enough to remember when tri-coats were first introduced, tri-coat pearls. And I remember the time we were thinking, oh, this has got to be a fad. This is so expensive. It's so difficult to get it through the assembly plant. This won't last. Here we are today, 30 years later, 35 years later, they're still there, and they've only grown. They've only gotten bigger. So we'll see.
Our next question is from an attendee who saw an automated 3D printed coating that painted logos on a vehicle directly off of a gun, and a car was produced, but how feasible is that to repair?
I haven't seen that yet personally.
I haven't seen that either, but I'm guessing if you can 3D print it to start with, you should be able to 3D print it to repair it. I mean, again, it's a guess. I haven't seen this, but that's probably one of those technologies that, again, like we said, down the road, who knows?
It was like an inkjet printer that painted cars. BMW prototyped it. So that's the information we have. So we'll look for more information about that.
Yeah.
We'll check for sure.
Thank you. And each of you have talked a lot about new technologies and their impacts. Can you each please share what you're most excited about when it comes to these new technologies?
Well, I'll start. From my world of color, I'm very interested in something Jeff had mentioned, right? And Andy's involved too. It's just automating, digitizing, the process for color matching and repairing. It's a difficult thing to do. There's a lot of variables involved with achieving a good color match. But I think that's really, the opportunity for everybody to improve their offering for customers, so the customers are more efficient and more productive. A lot of time is wasted in the color matching area. So the more we can do to streamline that, make it easier and more accurate and efficient, I think the better. So everybody's working on it, and we've seen innovation from each other, especially over the last 10, 15 years. And I think there's more to come. So I'm excited about those opportunities. But that's my world. I spend most of it in color. So.
And the color's the fun part of it. I mean, that's really what you see and what differentiates everything, and really adds the excitement to this business. But I think it's when you talk about technology, it's really some of the things that are happening with big data and AI, and what's that going to do to our industry, and how it's going to make us more productive and efficient, because the vehicles are getting more and more complex, and it's taking longer to work on them, and more electronics. I mean they're really computers on wheels now, and you see less mechanical and more electronics and more software in the vehicles today. And how do we in the collision industry really start to embrace that, but start to look at what can we do internal, ourselves, to use this technology and AI and data to become more efficient and effective, and really repair these vehicles properly and get them back on the road so they operate properly and safely. It's just all that technology. When you think about an autonomous car, and I'm going to see a car driving around through the shop, and from station A to station B, and then how do we deliver it back to the customer? Does someone have to drive it now, or do I just program it and say drive back home? But I think those are all going to be some exciting things that we're going to start to see, and it'll be interesting to see where this all goes.
Great.
Likewise, I would second the same opinion that big data AI will be probably one of the most, let's say, bright areas. We'll see quite a lot. What we've seen so far has been what we call narrow area AI, which is basically just systems that do a certain thing. Think your weather apps, your support chat bots that we have through our websites and so on. So in the future, maybe although these systems are quite powerful now, in the future, the idea is to interconnect them and create more and more of these systems. So they are powerful enough as they are, but the playing field is considered narrow because they only do one thing. So the more and more we learn, the more data we have, the more we can interconnect the dots and create different things, such as obviously on color with spectrophotometers, into our support arena, into everything else. So there's quite a lot of growth to be expected there in the next 5 to 10 years.
I you made a comment, Jeff, about their computers on wheels now, and I couldn't agree with you more. I remember going, you go to the auto show, especially in Detroit. You guys are in Michigan, and it used to be you wanted to know about the engine, you want to know about the horsepower, chassis and everything else and how it handles. Now people go and they're more interested in just the inside of the car, right? What's the interior like? How comfortable is it? How big is my computer screen? So, yeah, and you guys both said it very well about data, using data. We are heading towards autonomous driving. Everybody's guessing at how long it'll take, but there will be a generation beyond us that will probably never know driving, right? Or never know the joy of driving. Right? Won't want to. They'll just expect to get in a car and go, just take me where I'm going.
And can you share any information about self-healing coatings or energy-generating coatings?
I don't have any background in that specifically, so I don't know if Jeff or Andy.
Yeah, no, I've heard about them, but that's about the extent of my knowledge on those also.
Okay. Future CIECAST webinar.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
So in closing, we have many different industry segments on the phone, and with all the changes taking place, can you each share in closing what your main takeaway is for the collision industry as a whole? And you've touched on it throughout, but if you could please summarize your thoughts as a whole, that would be appreciated.
Again, from my perspective, for the industry, it's about getting cost out, improving efficiencies. The aftermarket body shop industry has been consolidating for quite a while, right? And the demand is that, we get cost out and we just improve efficiency across the board. And I think sustainability too, is going to be important, not just for us as paint manufacturers, but for everybody throughout the industry. So, very high level, that's what I see. And there's just so many initiatives underneath all that to drive that.
And I think in addition to that, the industry's changing. It's probably changing more now. And I know we say this all the time, it's changed more now than it has in the last 15 years, but we're seeing so many changes now with technology, with ADAS and radars and electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. There's so much happening that's really changing. That mechanical vehicle that's been around since the early 1900s is totally changing today. And to repair that, you can't do it the way you've always done it. So I think when we look at it, and the message is really, you need to follow those OEM repair procedures. You really need to understand how to repair these properly. And the other big piece of it is training. It's not the same car that our parents drove or we grew up with. You need that training, and you really need to go out and make sure that your technicians are well trained and understand this technology. And one of the things that came up at CIC last week was just talking about when you unplug a battery, all those connectors, if you're not covering the connector, an overspray gets into it. When you plug that back together, that causes resistance. It's going to heat up. It could cause that battery to start a fire or have what they call a thermal event 30, 60, 90 days or 2 years down the road. And again, that liability comes back to the shop. And it's little things like that you wouldn't think about. We've been painting cars, we get a little overspray in electrical connectors all the time. but with a high voltage electric vehicle, it makes a big difference. And that's where that training and knowledge really comes in. So I think that's really the key. The technology is changing, and you really need to have a good understanding and improve and increase your knowledge about what's happening.
I'll second that as well. So digital transformation obviously will continue, and this is throughout the industry, and it's an exciting time to be in the industry as always. That brings challenges, but also brings quite a lot of enhancements, incremental enhancements, new changes. So we'll continue to grow, we'll continue to be more automated, and there'll be plenty of cool things, at least for the technology side, to that we can continue to dive in. But it's a exciting time to be in the industry for sure.
Thank you for all of the great information you shared. Those are all the questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Stacy. I'd like to thank you, Dan Benton, Jeff Wildman, Andy Hysi. Appreciate you taking your time and meeting with us today. I think it was great information that everyone will benefit from. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just quickly, this presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com. I'd invite you to check CIECA.com for a schedule of future broadcasts and to watch recordings of past webinars. Links are available under the CIECAST tab. I would like to quickly mention that we have our CIECA Connects conference, September 13th and 14th in St. Louis, Missouri. We'd love to have everyone attend. Great information. We've got a great list of speakers. I think you'd find it very interesting. And finally, follow us on CIECA social media to keep up with events that are happening in the industry. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.